Also making headlines today, Donald Trump's nearly $1.8 billion so-called anti-weaponization fund. It was hit by two new lawsuits. The civil complaints filed in federal court in Virginia and Washington, D.C. argue the fund violates the Constitution and other federal laws. So the plaintiffs include a prominent government watchdog group and a former federal prosecutor who says he was fired last year over his work prosecuting cases against January 6 rioters. These lawsuits, though, come as several members of Congress have introduced legislation to block this fund, including the top Democrat in the House Judiciary Committee.
Go to Section 4 of the 14th Amendment, and it says that neither the United States nor any state shall assume or pay a debt or obligation for the purpose of paying for insurrection or rebellion against the United States. So it's unconstitutional, and it's just constitutionally blasphemous and outrageous that we would be taking money from every citizen of the United States paying taxes to give to people who attacked our police officers and tried to overthrow an American presidential election.
Joining me now, former federal prosecutor and legal analyst Ankush Khardori. So, Ankush, I want to get your honest opinion here, right? Do these efforts to challenge the constitutionality of the fund really have a chance?
You know, I think the challenges in the courts are going to face an uphill battle. As Raskin said, he has this argument about there being an insurrection triggering provision of the 14th Amendment. The problem is, among others, that, the question of whether January 6th was an insurrection, particularly as it related to Donald Trump, has been litigated somewhat, right? There was an effort to disqualify Trump from running for 2024 on the theory that he was barred from running. So that is not a theory that has been sort of unequivocally accepted by the courts. So I think these are, worthy efforts in the courts, but just given the nature of the relevant legal rules, I think they could face an uphill battle. The much more direct and unimpeachable mechanism, for lack of a better word, to shut this thing down is for Congress to pass a law, for the Senate Republicans to actually stand up and block this notorious historical grift and fraud on the American public.
Speaking of Republicans, acting Attorney General Todd Blanche facing the wrath of many GOP senators over its creation this week, according to multiple reports. Donald Trump's $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS was likely going to be dismissed by the judge. So why would Blanche even agree to this settlement in the first place?
Because Blanche is a partisan and his loyalties run to the president, Trump, who was his client. Blanche represented Trump in the criminal cases surrounding the 2020 election. That's why he got put in as deputy attorney general, and that's why he's been elevated to the acting attorney general. It's not because he's an amazing lawyer or some, valuable component of the legal profession. The reason he's there is because he serves Donald Trump's interests very well. And I think it was a rather shameful display that we saw this week on the part of Todd Blanche, the acting attorney general, going to Congress, acting as if this was normal and justifying this fund. It is not. It's based on a pack of lies. He should know that. If he doesn't, he's unqualified. If he's lying just to, help Trump out on this and pretending this slush fund is a good idea, that makes him unfit too. So I hope the Senate Republicans, in addition to doing the right thing and shutting this fund down entirely, it should be $0 in this fund, consider whether they actually want to confirm Blanche to the permanent post. I mean, this is a guy who's really, I think, demonstrated that he has not actually got the ethical scruples that warrant being put in that position on a permanent basis.
Ankush, I want to talk about another major talking point of this fund that has a lot of people upset. The DOJ says anyone can apply. There's no partisan requirement here. Michael Cohen, in fact, Donald Trump's lawyer turned critic, says he is now getting his own application ready. Others who believe they were politically targeted are considering applying too.
I first thought it was a piece from The Onion because it can't be serious. It appears that they're serious. It's to compensate people who've been targeted by the Justice Department for, they say, personal, political, or ideological reasons. So I'm guessing I'll be in line. I hope I'll be ahead of those who savagely beat police officers and sacked the Capitol.
Are you going to apply?
Well, I'll talk to my lawyers, but it certainly sounds intended for someone like me.
Oh. So with Todd Blanche choosing the 5 members on the oversight panel and Donald Trump with the power to now dismiss any of those members as he wishes, is there any chance Comey or Cohen, for example, will succeed with their applications?
There is not. Now, one of the other things Todd Blanche has been doing recently is claiming that there's all this hidden evidence surrounding the seashell indictment against James Comey, which there doesn't appear to be hidden evidence of his intent to actually threaten the life of the president. That case appears to be extremely weak, if not frivolous. So I would be frankly shocked if this administration agreed to pay James Comey. The president hates Michael Cohen, so I would be shocked if they do that. Now, it may be the case that if this fund gets set up, which it absolutely should not, that to save some face, they will give some funds out to some people who are on the left or Democrats or something. But this is not the purpose of this exercise. The purpose of this exercise is to extend a campaign of lies surrounding the 2020 election, a campaign of lies surrounding the people who tried to overturn that election and who deserve to be prosecuted for their participation in that effort, both in the planning and up to Trump, and also the people who sacked the Capitol that day. The notion that this is designed or may go to Democrats, it's a farce. I mean, this is not what this is for.
And Ankush Khardori, thank you so much for your time and your input today.